Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar this morning. We are going to give everyone just another minute or two to log on, and then we'll begin shortly. All right, we have a lot of material to cover, so I'll go ahead and get going, although it looks like a few people are still joining, but we'll go ahead and kick off. So again, hello and welcome. Thank you very much for attending our webinar this morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. My name is Christy Majorkirth, and I am part of the Art Secretariat team here at Winrock International. We are very excited that so many people could join us today, and we look forward to sharing the details of the final version of TREES version 2.0 with you. As many of you know, the standard went through a public consultation for 60 days between February and April this year. In addition, the Art Secretariat held a second public consultation period for a revised version of the High Forest Low Deforestation, or HFLD, crediting approach for version 2.0. The second consultation period lasted for 30 days and ended in mid-June. The Art Secretariat worked closely with the Art Board to address and respond to the numerous public comments that we received. In this presentation, I'll highlight the aspects of TREES 2.0 that are new, as well as summarize the key requirements from TREES 1.0 that have not changed. We want to ensure that we provide a comprehensive overview of all TREES requirements. Before we begin, I'd like to just cover some webinar logistics. We will answer questions at the end of the session after the presentation is completed. However, you are welcome to submit questions at any time by using the chat feature at the bottom of the webinar screen. Please type in your question and submit it. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Art website along with a copy of the slides. For those that are not as familiar with Art, we wanted to first provide a brief overview. The recently published IPCC assessment report is a dire warning that urgent transformational action is our only chance to maintain the goals of the Paris Agreement and avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change. All studies that evaluate pathways to limit warming to 1.5 degrees by mid-century conclude that nature-based solutions, in particular the protection and restoration of forests, are critical to deliver near-term climate results at scale. Forest conservation and restoration can provide over 1/3 of the emissions reductions needed in this timeframe, representing a gigaton scale mitigation imperative. For forests to deliver on their massive climate impact potential, it will require mobilizing billions of dollars of additional annual investment from all sources, including from the private sector. Private capital flows through markets, and markets need standardization so that REDD+ credits are comparable across jurisdictions and fungible with emission reductions from other sectors. And in order to attract private capital at scale, market participants need to have confidence in the integrity of the results. In a nutshell, that is why we created Art, to serve as a global quality benchmark for REDD+, providing confidence needed in the integrity of the forest emission reductions and removals to unlock finance at scale for ambitious climate action to protect and restore forests, and to incentivize governments to achieve those results. ART's architecture was also designed to enhance confidence. ART is a standalone program, independent of governments or donor countries, with standardized procedures for all participants. It includes a transparent and inclusive process governed by globally recognized experts and operated by an independent secretariat, supported by expert technical committees. The ART Board provides strategic guidance and ensures the program's environmental and social integrity. The board oversees implementation of the ART program and ensures it is in accordance with emerging UNFCCC processes. The board will also ensure strong governance, transparency, and processes to ensure quality and adequate safeguards. 6 immutable principles guide ART and the development of ART standard trees. We will briefly review them here, and you will see how these were operationalized throughout the standard. The first principle is to recognize countries with quantifiable emission reductions from slowing, halting, and reversing forest cover loss. This includes recognizing high forest, low deforestation countries. The second is to ensure consistency with UNFCCC COP decisions, including the Paris Agreement, Warsaw Framework, and Cancun Safeguards. This means that trees does not conflict with these decisions, but in some cases, trees may go beyond the UNFCCC decisions. Indeed, trees has more specific requirements around eligibility, establishing crediting levels, and calculating emission reductions and removals in order to be transparent and create fungible emissions reductions. Our third principle is to embody high environmental integrity. ART will also promote national ambition and contribute to Paris Agreement goals, including progress towards NDCs. Further, ART will credit emission reductions at the national level or subnational level as an interim measure. And finally, trees will set crediting baselines for deforestation that initially reflect historical emission levels and thereafter will decline periodically to require higher ambition over time. ART's standard for measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification is called the REDD+ Environmental Excellence Standard, or TREES. TREES is based on a decade of learning and evolution of REDD+. Donor governments have made significant investments over the past decade in pilot programs to transition REDD+ to a jurisdictional scale, including bilateral agreements with forest countries and multilateral investments through programs like REDD Early Movers, the World Bank Carbon Fund's Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, and the Green Climate Fund. These programs have helped to build capacity in forest countries and test scientific approaches for quantification and monitoring, but they were not designed to attract private capital at scale. As we were developing ART, we consciously built on this base of experience to create a crediting program that is fully aligned with requirements in the Paris Agreement and incorporates market elements that enhance confidence in results. TREES ensures consistency with the UNFCCC decisions, but as I mentioned, sometimes TREES goes beyond the UNFCCC requirements. TREES is Paris aligned in that it requires that forests be included in the country's NDC. It addresses ambition through a regularly updated conservative crediting level. It includes Cancun aligned safeguards and has measures in place to avoid double counting with Paris Agreement targets and the CORSIA. TREES also incorporates market elements such as independent third-party verification, the mitigation of leakage and reversal risks, and the issuance of serialized credits on a transparent registry. These requirements allow for TREES credits to be fungible with credits from other sectors and to attract finance at the scale needed to protect and restore forests globally. When TREES 1.0 was published in February 2020, the focus was on reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. At that time, ART communicated that the next version of TREES would expand to crediting of restoration of forests and protecting forests, thereby offering incentives for participants to engage in a wider variety of activities. TREES 2.0 was developed throughout 2020, and as mentioned earlier, a public consultation process for TREES 2.0 was held between February and April of this year. A second consultation period for the revised HFLD crediting approach was held between May and June of this year. After careful consideration of all the comments by the ART board, Trees 2.0 was published last month on August 19th. The updates broaden options for our participants in 3 key areas. Trees 2.0 expands jurisdictional scale crediting for forest restoration and the establishment of new forests, also known as carbon removals. This is the first time that a jurisdictional program has established a separate crediting approach for removals. Trees 2.0 also adds an innovative crediting approach for jurisdictions that have high forest cover and low levels of deforestation, or HFLD jurisdictions. These jurisdictions typically don't earn a lot of credits for reducing deforestation because their deforestation levels are so low. The new approach in trees aims to incentivize continued low deforestation, creating a more effective and equitable global system for forest protection. Trees 2.0 also provides a pathway for the contributions of Indigenous peoples' territories to aggregate as subnational accounting areas as part of a national submission to ART. In addition, these subnational Indigenous peoples' territories are eligible to qualify as HFLD, and therefore may elect to use the HFLD crediting approach to better reflect their historical performance in protecting their forests. Additional updates in Trees 2.0 include improving the requirements for calculating uncertainty, clarifying provisions to avoid double counting under the Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation, or CORSIA, and for transfers associated with the Paris Agreement's Article 6.2. We also clarified situations in which credits issued for use in domestic compliance markets may not be considered double issued with trees credits. Finally, we clarified the flexibility of how project level activities can fit within a jurisdictional crediting approach, or nest, under trees. All right, so now we will start diving into some of the actual details of the trees requirements. A key requirement of trees is that participants using trees must be a national government or a subnational government with national government approval. A national government may register either its entire national accounting area or a subnational accounting area. For subnational accounting areas, the scale eligibility threshold in trees is a minimum area of 2.5 million hectares of forests. It is important to note that there is no scale threshold for countries registering a national accounting area. So countries smaller than 2.5 million hectares of forest are indeed eligible to participate. The boundaries of subnational accounting shall correspond with no more than one level down from the national level and/or one or more Indigenous peoples' territories. If a national government is registering a subnational accounting area which includes multiple jurisdictions and/or one or more Indigenous peoples' territories, the jurisdictions and territories do not need to be contiguous. The registration of subnational accounting areas that meet these eligibility requirements is allowed until December 31st, 2030, at which time all participants must transition to national accounting. A subnational government, again defined as no more than one administrative level down from the national level, so a state or a province, for example, must meet the trees scale threshold, again 2.5 million hectares of forest area. They must register all of their jurisdiction and must have national government approval to participate in ART. The registration of subnational participants that meet these eligibility requirements is again allowed until December 31st, 2030. After which time only national scale participation is permissible in ART. Trees offers several crediting approaches for emissions reductions and removals. So first, for emissions reductions, participants may use the trees crediting level, or for eligible participants, the optional HFLD crediting level. Participants whose HFLD score exceeds the minimum threshold may use the HFLD crediting approach. We will discuss all of these items in more detail in the coming slides. Trees also offers an optional approach for crediting removals from forest restoration and the establishment of new forests. Only participants who have reduced their deforestation and degradation emissions below their trees crediting level are able to use this approach for crediting removals. Again, we'll dive more deeply into the details shortly. Regardless of the approach used, each crediting period under ART is 5 years in length. Following the initial crediting period, a new crediting level must be calculated. In instances where appropriate data is available, the crediting period may begin up to 4 years prior to the date that the participant submits its initial documentation to ART. So looking at the calculations at a very high level, once a participant has determined its crediting level, they subtract annual emissions as monitored and reported under trees, subtract the required buffer pool contribution to compensate for reversals, adjust for uncertainty, and in cases where the accounting area is subnational, they take standardized deductions for leakage. Again, we'll go into more details on each of these items soon. The emission reductions and supporting data, documentation, and calculations are all independently verified for conformance against trees. Upon approval by the ART board, the Secretariat then issues serialized trees credits to the country or jurisdiction in its registry account. Any credits issued under the HFLD crediting approach will be labeled in the registry as HFLD. Removals credits are calculated similarly by first determining the area of removals activities that exceed the removals crediting level, multiplying that by the appropriate removals factors, and then just as with the emission reductions, the required buffer pool contribution to compensate for reversals is subtracted, adjustments are made for uncertainty, and standardized deductions are taken for leakage if the accounting area is subnational. The removals are also independently verified and, upon approval by the ART board, issued by the Secretariat as serialized credits to the country or jurisdiction in its registry account. Again, removals credits will be labeled as such in the ART registry. So we'll now start our dive more deeply into the crediting level approaches. So first is the trees crediting level. The trees crediting level is established by calculating the historical average of emissions from deforestation and forest degradation for the 5-year period that ends directly prior to the start of the crediting period. The trees crediting level is valid for 5 years, or the length of the crediting period. It must be recalculated at the beginning of each new crediting period and cannot increase. To qualify to use the HFLD crediting approach, jurisdictions must first determine if they meet the trees HFLD threshold by calculating their trees HFLD score. The score takes into consideration 2 unique qualities of HFLDs, specifically the percent forest cover and the deforestation rate. If the jurisdiction's HFLD score exceeds the threshold of 0.5, the jurisdiction is considered HFLD under ART and may use the optional HFLD crediting approach if it chooses to do so. The score is calculated for the accounting area, so it may be applied to the national or subnational accounting area. Jurisdictions that qualify as HFLD, as previously described, are eligible to use the HFLD crediting approach. The HFLD crediting level is established by first calculating the historical average of emissions from deforestation and forest degradation for the 5-year period that ends directly prior to the start of the crediting period. This 5-year average of emissions is added to a figure that is composed of 2 factors that recognize the unique characteristics of HFLDs, the HFLD score and a carbon stock percentage, which in this case is 0.05% of carbon stock of trees in the standing forest. In addition, HFLD participants may optionally calculate the foregone removals. This is the sequestration associated with the forest remaining forest in areas that would have been deforested in the absence of their RED activities. Finally, HFLD participants may be subject to a deduction if their annual emissions exceed their 5-year historical average by more than 15%. A sliding scale deduction is applied based on the amount the annual emissions exceed the historical average. Participants that demonstrate that emissions from deforestation and degradation have been reduced below their trees crediting level are eligible to also credit for removals for the same year. Trees allows for crediting from non-forest to forest only, and eligible areas must have been non-forest for at least 5 years prior to the start of restoration activities. To determine the removals crediting level, the participant calculates the average area in hectares of commercial planting and natural restoration during the 5-year historical reference period. If the areas of natural forest restoration and commercial planting can be tracked separately, they are treated differently, allowing all areas of natural restoration to be eligible for removals crediting by applying a zero crediting level. Participants then track any new removals areas that are planted during each year of the crediting period. Eligible areas above the removals crediting level area are multiplied by the appropriate removal factor, which should take into account forest type, age, mortality, and any other parameters that influence biomass accumulation. Participants may also include areas of natural restoration which were initiated up to 10 years prior to the start of the crediting period. Only the incremental growth that occurs during the crediting period from these areas may be included, however. So now we will shift and discuss the aspects of trees that apply to all of the crediting level approaches. So as I mentioned, Trees 2.0 includes a revised approach for calculating uncertainty, which focuses on the combined uncertainty of the calculated emissions reductions and removals value, rather than separate estimates for crediting level and annual emissions values. To develop this new approach, we worked with a REDD+ expert who authored a paper that lays out a practical way of reducing the risk of overestimation that would be considered intolerable by market stakeholders. So rather than reporting and discounting for uncertainties associated with underreporting, which does not affect credibility or rigor, we now apply a risk tolerance level that only considers overreporting or overestimation. This is done by applying a one-sided confidence interval and requiring conservative discounting based on a risk tolerance of overreporting. The risk tolerance level was recommended as it is conservative, while still allowing some flexibility for countries with higher uncertainties associated with including degradation emissions. We also removed the 15% allowable uncertainty threshold, which gave participants the first 15% free, if you will, with no deductions. And we now require conservative deductions at all uncertainty levels above zero using a sliding scale. Finally, our last change to uncertainty was adding a new provision which allows participants to recalculate uncertainty at 5-year intervals and recoup deductions if uncertainty has decreased over time. For leakage, if a participant submits a subnational accounting area, a leakage assessment must be conducted. Trees includes 4 categories for leakage based on the percentage of a nation's forest, including in the subnational accounting area, with corresponding leakage deductions ranging from 0 to 20%. If the area includes greater than 90% of the nation's forests, no deduction is required. Trees defines a reversal to be when a participant's annual emissions exceed its crediting level. Trees requires participants to contribute a percentage of generated trees credits at each issuance into a program-wide buffer pool to act as insurance against future reversals. The amount of the contribution is based on the risk of a reversal actually occurring. The maximum risk rating under trees is 25%, but it can be lowered through 3 mitigation options. First, if a participant has legislation or executive decrees actively implemented and demonstrably supporting REDD+, a 5% reduction is applied. Second, if the participant can demonstrate low variability of annual forest emissions, a 10% reduction is applied. And third, if a participant can demonstrate implementation of a national reversal mitigation action plan or strategy developed in alignment with Cancun Safeguard F, a 5% reduction is applied. A participant can qualify for multiple mitigation factors. If all 3 mitigation factors are in place, a participant will have a buffer contribution level of 5%. If a participant experiences a reversal, credits from the buffer pool will be retired to compensate for the amount of emissions associated with the reversal. The participant must then increase its contribution to the buffer pool each year by 5%. If a participant leaves ARD at any time, it forfeits all remaining buffer pool contributions. These will be retired to compensate for any possible future reversals the participant may have when not monitored under ARD. At the highest level, all REDD+ activities under trees must be conducted in accordance with the Cancun safeguards. The Tree Safeguards Committee recognized that this is a very broad statement, however, and additional information is needed to be able to effectively implement and report on the safeguards. Based on an extensive review of current REDD+ initiatives and country summary of information reports, as well as their knowledge of national level safeguard implementation, the committee unpacked Cancun safeguards into 16 key thematic safeguard areas. Each theme has a structure, process, and outcome indicator. This is intended to mirror the steps countries are using in establishing their national safeguard systems to address and respect all aspects of the Cancun safeguards. Participants may use their summary of information reports, as well as their safeguard information systems once fully implemented, to monitor and report on the safeguards under trees, although other forms of reporting are also permitted. In the first crediting period, participants must conform with all structure and process indicators. In addition, they must either conform with or provide a plan for conforming with the outcome indicators. Conformance with all the indicators must be demonstrated within 5 years of joining ART. The tree standard requires validation to occur after year 1 of each 5-year crediting period and verification to occur after years 1, 3, and 5 of each crediting period. Verification will be optional following years 2 and 4 of each crediting period. However, no credits will be issued without verification. The validations and verifications will be conducted in accordance with the tree's validation and verification standard, which is available on our website. Validation and verification bodies, or VVBs, will be required to be accredited by an International Accreditation Forum, or IAF, organization, and to submit an application to be an approved VVB under ART. The application will focus on whether the VVB has the appropriate competencies and resources to perform validations and verifications for ART. While the Secretariat will oversee the approval of VVBs to perform validations and verifications under ART, each participant will oversee the request for bids and selection of the VVB it wishes to use. In addition, the VVB will contract directly with the participant. A conflict of interest assessment will be required prior to work beginning and will be approved by the Secretariat to ensure objective third-party audits. The Secretariat will conduct initial and ongoing training for VVBs and will hold periodic meetings for discussion of verification issues that emerge to ensure consistency of interpretation of trees and implementation across all the VVBs. In Trees 2.0, our double counting requirements were clarified regarding how trees addresses the avoidance of double claiming. The updates recognize that international requirements for corresponding adjustments to avoid double counting under the Paris Agreement Article 6 are still being negotiated, that the infrastructure for countries to account for corresponding adjustments is not yet in place, that there will be a transition period for the Paris Agreement rules and infrastructure to be in place, and that corresponding adjustments may not be required for all potential agreements that ART participants may enter into. ART also recognizes that requirements for corresponding adjustments are clear for government-to-government transfers under Article 6.2 and for transfers for use in the ICAO CORSIA. Therefore, the ART Registry already has infrastructure in place to facilitate the avoidance of double claiming for all transactions where accounting for international transfers may be required or preferred. This includes functionality to publish host country letters of authorization for transfers of trees credits, to label trees credits associated with a letter of authorization, as well as to label trees credits for which a corresponding adjustment has been applied. In addition, Annex B was added to enable participants to adhere to the specific requirements of ICAO's CORSIA. Finally, Trees 2.0 clarifies that situations in which credits issued for use in domestic compliance markets may not be considered double issued with trees credits. A very common question we receive is whether ART allows nesting of projects in smaller scale REDD+ activities. While ART does not directly credit project level activities, we recognize the important role these efforts play in implementing a national REDD+ strategy. ART does not prescribe the way that governments work with Indigenous people, local communities, or the private sector, but rather we offer flexibility for any number of approaches as best suited to individual country situations for nesting projects or creating benefit allocation agreements. Any option agreed upon by the relevant parties for benefit sharing between governments and private entities, which could be communities, projects, or individual landowners, are permissible. The use of existing allocation methods and tools are permitted, or a country could build on an approach it has already developed. Art does not stipulate how this must be done. For example, the parties could share trees credits, share revenues from the sale of trees credits, share payments for ecosystem services or other financial incentives not linked to carbon credits, or allow projects to register under other greenhouse gas programs. All of these options are subject to the requirements of Treaty Section 13 on double counting and double issuance, however. And this flexibility is clarified in Trees 2.0. We recently published a paper detailing the options for nesting under ART, which is posted on the ART website, so we encourage you to look there for further details. ART has developed an online, logic-based registry system that is tailor-made to manage the ART process and documentation flow. The registry is managed by the ART Secretariat. ART participants must open accounts and will have login access that will have functionality, including, for example, the ability to upload trees documentation, transfer and retire ERRs, and select verifiers. The registry also includes links to public reports to enable stakeholders to see trees documentation, credit issuances, and credit status. The Secretariat will issue serialized credits into country and jurisdiction registry accounts for subsequent transfer or retirement. All right, that was a tremendous amount of information, but I want to say thank you again to everyone who participated today. In a moment, I'm going to turn the microphone over to my colleague, Jessica Orrego, who has been compiling your questions. As a reminder, if we don't get to your questions today, we will follow up via email as soon as we can afterwards. Also, as a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be available on the ART website soon, and you can always feel free to email questions that you have after this to the email listed here. So thank you again for your attention, and Jessica, I will turn things over to you.
Great, Christy, thank you. So I'm seeing a few questions come in. I'll start with one. The first question is, why are remaining forests not including in removals accounting under trees?
Sure, that's a great question. So we do recognize that removals from remaining forests play an important part in combating climate change. However, we analyzed a lot of different options for crediting this activity as we developed the removals approach, and we determined that it is really difficult to establish a credible crediting level at the jurisdictional scale. That being said, we are going to definitely actively monitor technological advances that could improve the accuracy of this type of accounting for the future.
Great, thank you. Okay, here's another question also about removals. Why does trees allow natural restoration activities to apply a different baseline than commercial forests?
That's another great question. I'm glad someone asked that. So ART wanted to incentivize natural forest restoration activities because of all of the co-benefits, so the biodiversity and other ecosystem benefits that they offer in addition to the climate benefits. So that is why we allow them to have a different baseline, assuming they can be monitored separately.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so here's one. So why isn't there a single definition of HFLD, and why is that score used instead?
Sure, so this was definitely a change for Trees 2.0. So Trees 1.0 included the static HFLD definition. We changed it to be a score in Trees 2.0 basically to allow for some flexibility. So we wanted there to be an opportunity for participants that had a greater area of forest, but a slightly higher deforestation rate, which might indicate that they had a higher threat to qualify as HFLD, but then also a participant that had experienced deforestation and has had some forest cover loss, but has managed to reduce that deforestation rate to also qualify. So using the score and having the threshold maintains the rigor while allowing flexibility for HFLD jurisdictions that are at different stages.
Cool, great. And so this is a related question that came in. For which year does the HFLD score need to meet the requirements to be able to use the HFLD crediting approach?
Oh, another good question, because I realized I did not say that during the presentation. So a participant must meet the HFLD score threshold in every year of the reference period in order to qualify.
Okay, great. Okay, this is a question that comes in a lot, so I think it's useful to answer it here. Can a country's FREL be used under ART?
Yes, we do get that question a lot. So again, I'm glad someone put that forth. Thank you for all these great questions. So TREES requires participants to use the TREES crediting level approaches to ensure consistency across all participants. So no, a participant cannot just use their FREL. We would expect, however, that most of the underlying data that was used to calculate the FREL would also be appropriate under TREES. And so hopefully it's more of a matter of recalculating the crediting level, and it wouldn't require a large amount of additional data collection or manipulation there.
Okay, great. Okay, so here's one about the HFLD crediting approach. Can the carbon stock value used in the HFLD crediting level calculation include soil carbon?
So the short answer is no. The carbon stock value used should include above ground and below ground tree biomass only. So it would not include soil carbon.
Great. Okay. Okay, here's one about subnational participation.
Okay.
Can several subnational jurisdictions aggregate or join together under ART?
Sure, so another good question. So individual subnational jurisdictions that meet the 2.5 million hectares of forest scale threshold can directly participate under ART. If several subnational jurisdictions or recognized Indigenous peoples territories want to aggregate together to meet the scale threshold, they would need to be part of a national government submission. National government participants, again, if you remember, can either submit a national accounting area or a subnational accounting area. So the subnational accounting area might be these aggregated groups of jurisdictions and Indigenous peoples territories. And there might be an advantage for a national government to start with a subnational accounting area comprised of a combination of jurisdictions and Indigenous peoples territories, as it might be a pathway to start building capacity and support within the country for eventually transitioning to a national accounting area.
Thank you, that's great. Okay, so here's one about buyers. How will countries find buyers for TREES credits? And does ART find the buyers?
Sure, so ART oversees our program and the issuance of TREES credits. So we do not act as a marketplace and match supply with demand. ART participants can sell credits to any buyer in the voluntary carbon market or to buyers under ICAO's CORSIA, for example. One possible options that supply jurisdictions have is to work with Emergent, which serves as an intermediary to match supply of TREES credits with a number of corporate and sovereign credit buyers. So for example, Emergent is coordinating the LEAF Coalition, which is interested in buying TREES credits for vintages 2022 to 2026, but Emergent has also worked with other buyers as well. So that would be one option for supply jurisdictions to consider.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is a question about removals credits under ART. The question is whether removals credits can be labeled or tagged separately for buyers that want removals credits in the ART registry.
Sure, yes, the ART registry will indeed label trees credits generated using the removals approach so that they can be easily identified in the registry. We will also be labeling trees credits generated using the HFLD crediting approach, so you'll see both of those labeled in the registry.
Okay, thanks. Okay, let's see a couple more here. So a question about the definition of forest. So how does trees define forests? The definition of forests because the definition of forests can vary from country to country. So how does trees handle this?
Sure, so we do definitely understand that countries use different definitions of forests in different contexts. So the trees requirement is that participants use the forest definition that they use in their UNFCCC reporting, whatever that definition is. And then we require that the same forest definition be used for each crediting period, for the entire crediting period, even if they change their UNFCCC definition during that time. We want them to use a consistent definition across the period. If they do wish to update their forest definition in between crediting periods and change it when they start a new crediting period, they would need to apply that definition to both the reference period and the crediting period, again, to ensure consistency with all of the accounting.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so another question about the HFLD score. What happens if the HFLD score changes over time during the trees crediting period?
Sure, so as I mentioned in response to one of the previous questions, the HFLD score must be greater than 0.5 for each year of the 5-year reference period, so the 5 years directly before the crediting period. And then participants who qualify as HFLD maintain that status for the entire 5 years of the crediting period, even if their HFLD score changes during that time, to ensure that they can use the approach for the full crediting period. However, as I mentioned, the HFLD score has to be recalculated and eligibility has to be redemonstrated at the start of each new crediting period. So when the next credit period started, they would once again have to calculate the HFLD score for each year of the reference period. If at some point during that time they fell below the score threshold, they would lose their HFLD status. So it is possible for a jurisdiction to either gain or lose HFLD status in between crediting periods based on their performance.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so here's another one. Does trees require stakeholders like Indigenous peoples and local communities to be involved throughout the ART process, or is it just in the initial planning?
Great, yes, I was hoping we would get some safeguards questions. So trees does require that Indigenous peoples and local communities participate, as well as other stakeholders. So, including private landowners or project developers or anyone that is a stakeholder for that activity. They all must participate in the design, implementation, and monitoring of the REDD+ activities. So the idea is that the relevant stakeholders would be involved at every single stage, and therefore they have many opportunities for input and feedback and involvement throughout the process. We specifically have 2 different safeguard themes around protecting the rights of stakeholders to participate fully and effectively in the design and implementation, as well as ensuring that the participation is done in a meaningful way. So we have another theme that requires adequate participatory procedures for meaningful participation of specifically Indigenous people and local communities as well. So we do expect, and it will be validated and verified, that they are involved throughout the whole process.
Great, thank you, Christy. Okay, so one about removals. When can the removals crediting approach be used under trees?
Yes, so removals crediting is available and is optional, so it doesn't have to be used, but it is available for any jurisdiction that shows that its emissions from deforestation and forest degradation are below their trees crediting level for that year. So if they can show that they are below their trees crediting level for that year, they can also claim removals credits for that same year. And as I mentioned, this is always optional. So a jurisdiction does not have to include removals crediting if it doesn't wish to.
Great, thanks. So I think that we're probably going to wrap up. Actually, I just wanted to also point out that a lot of participants have asked about getting the slides. I just wanted to remind everyone that a recording of this webinar will be posted on the ART website within a few days. So you can please check in with us if you don't see it soon, or check in on the ART website, and it should be there within a few days.
Yep, and in addition, we'll have the PowerPoint as a separate document. So if you don't wish to sit through the full presentation, you can just review the slides as well.
Yeah. So I think with that, we can wrap up. We'd also like to make sure that you know that any questions that weren't answered today, we can answer via email.
Great, and as I mentioned before, please don't hesitate to reach out at red@winrock.org, and we'll respond to your questions as soon as we can. So thank you very, very much for your attendance today, and we look forward to speaking with you in the future. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.